I guess the first question, we're talking today all about how to really nail interviews and make sure that you put your best foot forward. So, Matt, the first step obviously is to prepare for an interview. And how can people do that?
Right. So I suggest a three-step process for preparing, and preparing is absolutely key. We need to make sure that we're thinking about how we can put our best foot forward and how we can do a good job when the spotlight is on us. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we research the company. We do some research on the position, on the role, to help us better understand what might be required of us in the moment to help. And as we do that research, we need to be thinking about specific themes that we want to communicate. What is it about ourselves that we want to make sure that we reveal? So at the end of the interview, if the interviewer doesn't remember any of the specific details, they'll take away some key themes. So it might be a theme of, I'm somebody who's up on the latest and greatest in the technology in my field, or perhaps I'm somebody who's very thorough and detail oriented. So we first research the company. We second think about the themes that we want to make sure we get across. And then third, we stockpile examples, stories, details that support each of our themes. So we want to make sure that we have an abundance of evidence that we can pull together. I like to use the analogy of cooking. I am a lousy cook. Andrew, I'm sure you're a much better cook than I. But if I can prepare my ingredients in advance, it makes it much easier when I follow that recipe. So research the company, think about the themes you want to get across, and provide some very specific examples that you might pull from to help you when you're asked the questions you're asked.
Yeah, I think those are really great pieces of advice. And, when you talk about themes, can you tell us a little bit about what those themes are? Because I think some people might get confused about what you mean by themes.
Sure, absolutely. So when you look at a job description, you're looking for the things that they want, and you're relating it to the skills that you bring. And you'll notice that there are things that really resonate with you and you have deep experience in. And that becomes a theme for you to make sure that you communicate. So let's say you're applying for a program manager job, and you see that one of the things that they're really looking for is somebody who's detail oriented and able to really drive projects from beginning to end. So you might have a theme that I am somebody who's very detail oriented and very directed in what I'm trying to get it through. And then with that theme in mind, you might come up with some examples from your life. You might talk about a particular project you managed from beginning to end. You might have a testimonial from a previous boss or colleague who said, gosh, Matt was really great at how he managed the project and kept track of all the details. You might even have some statistics that you can say that we plan to get this project from beginning to end in a 6-month window. And in fact, we finished in 5 months. And by having those specific examples that support that theme of somebody who's detail oriented and driven, when you're asked a question in the midst of the interview that touches on being detail oriented or how you manage projects from beginning to end, you've already thought about that theme, and you can then just pull in the different examples that you've already thought about. So the interview becomes an opportunity to simply assemble an answer rather than to have to create an answer on the spot.
That's really great advice because you also know, based on the job description and also the company, kind of what they're going to ask anyway, right?
Right. Right,
Got it.
absolutely,
And
and we have to do that work, and not only can we just guess at it, we can talk to other people who we might know who work for the company, who have interviewed there. You can actually use AI to help. You can type into a tool like ChatGPT or Bard, and you can say, interviewing for a job at this particular company, what are 3 questions for this particular role? And it does a pretty good job of giving you ideas about types of questions you'll be asked.
yeah, I really like that. And especially you can put in the job description so
Yeah,
it's even more specific. And even if the AI goes a little crazy, which the AI does sometimes,
right.
it's perfectly fine because, interviewer might go a little crazy and you don't really know what they're going to ask. They might throw some curveballs at you. So even if the questions are a little bit weird, it's still going to help you.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of what I've been doing in the last several years in my career is focusing on what I call spontaneous speaking, speaking in the moment. And that being prepared to be spontaneous is actually really important, although it sounds counterintuitive. But the practice you do, the thought process you have, the approach you take can help you be more successful. An athlete prepares and drills and does lots of practice. And then when they're in the midst of their sport, they're just responding to the in the moment situation that they see. And interviewing is just like that. A lot of preparation can help you do better in the moment.
Definitely. And when you get to the answer part, this is not obviously the first time we've talked. We've talked for my podcast, and
Yes.
I've read your book. And one of the things we talked about was how to structure an answer. And you have a mnemonic system, but also just a good way to say, hey, if you're going to answer a question, here's how to do it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to introduce the what I call the ADD structure. But before I do that, I'd like everybody to just first think about how you approach answering questions. Many of us get really nervous and feel like we have to defend our background or put ourselves in the best light possible. And I'd like to suggest the best thing to do is just answer the question. One of the biggest barriers to successful interviewing is ourselves. We get in our own way. We want to answer the question right. We want to give that perfect answer. And I would suggest that the best thing to do is focus on connecting with your interviewer. So it's about connection, not perfection. Just be in the moment and respond. And if you remove some of that pressure about doing it right, it helps. So, what we need to do once the question comes in is we need to give ourselves a moment to think about the answer. So we can simply say, let me think about that for a moment, or ask a clarifying question. Buy yourself a little bit of time so you can begin formulating your answer. And then the best thing to do is to structure your answer in a way that is packaged nicely. One, it helps you prioritize what to say. And two, it helps the person who's hearing your answer not only understand your answer in the moment, but often the person you interview with needs to go somewhere else and talk to other people about you. Often the person you're interviewing with is not the person who says you're hired. They have to discuss it with others, and you want them to represent your answers well. So I have a structure. It's called ADD for adding value. And this structure has three components. As you see on the screen, the first is to give an answer clearly and concisely. And then, second, to give a detailed example. This is an example that's specific to what it is the answer you're giving refers to. This is where we go back to what we've stockpiled before. I know the question is about my dedication or my detail orientedness. I've already pre-thought something I can use as my example. And then I need to describe the relevance. I need to connect the dots. What this means for you, Mr. Ms. Interviewer, or what this means for the company is. So, Andrew, I think one of the best ways to learn the ADD structure is to hear an example of it. So, if you wouldn't mind, and this is not scripted, everybody, I'm going to ask Andrew to ask me an interview question. So, imagine, Andrew, perhaps that I'm interviewing for my job that I currently have. I'm a lecturer at Stanford's Business School. Let's say you're the dean of the business school and you want to hire somebody to teach strategic communication. That's something I happen to do. What might be a reasonable question you would ask? And as everybody listens to my answer, I want you to hear how I use ADD.
Yes, and also, and I'm gonna double down that this is not scripted. We haven't, I haven't
I have
told
no
Matt
idea
what
what
the
you're going to
question would
ask.
be, so it's almost like a magic trick. So, Matt, if I was interviewing you, what I would ask is, if you have a student who's struggling, especially in your course with, some of the exercises or trying to grasp some of the concepts, how would you help that student?
I always ask my students to stretch their comfort level and to really explore and expand what it is they're learning. And often this means that some of my students feel uncomfortable and struggle. So, what I would do is I would pull the student aside when appropriate, perhaps after class or meet with them before class. And I would ask how I could be of best service. This happened literally earlier this week. I had a student who was struggling with a presentation that she had to give. And I pulled her aside and I said, is there something I can do to help? And she said one of the issues she was really struggling with was transitions. How did she move from one point of her presentation to another? And I gave her some suggestions and advice, and she felt much better. So if you were to hire me, know that I will work individually with each student to make sure that they are comfortable and have the ability to succeed by simply talking to them when they face challenges. So in that answer, and thank you, Andrew, that was a great question. I rarely am asked a question like that, but I answered it. I then gave a concrete example, and then I explained what it meant beyond this specific situation in terms of how I teach. Let me ask you this, Andrew, as somebody who asked that question as my pretend interviewer, was that answer helpful for you? Did it give you some insight? Was it something you think you could remember and share with others?
It did. Yeah, it totally was what I think an interviewer would be looking for. And I think especially what I like about ADD, and I know we have a graphic that in case anyone missed what the D's were, but what I think is especially great about ADD is when I tell people when they're doing their resume, when they're doing anything to sort of pitch themselves to a potential employer, don't just say what you've done, say how well you've done it. And I think the ADD structure does that. It's not just, hey, I am a teacher or I've taught somewhere else before. You're literally saying, hey, I did this and this is how well I do it. So that's why I actually like the ADD structure. And I think I told you that of all the sort of acronyms of all the mnemonic devices that I've heard over the years, I think ADD is actually one of the better ones.
Well, thank you, and you're exactly right. Allows you to highlight something specific that you've done and make it memorable so that the person can take it with you. And the ADD structure, simply answer the question, give a detailed example, and then describe the relevance. How I process this in my own brain is when somebody asks a question, I think, here's my answer, for example, and what this means is. So that's how I walk myself through the process. I say, answer, for example, what this means is. Now, I don't actually speak the for example and what that means is, but it helps me move from one place to the next. And people tell me not only does this help them give a more complete answer, but it helps them be more concise. I know, Andrew, you've interviewed people. I certainly have interviewed people in my career. And one of the things that really it can be very distracting is somebody talks too long. They talk too much. They say more than they need to. And this structure helps you be focused. It allows you to follow advice that my mother gave me many, many years ago, which is tell the time, don't build the clock. Many of us, when we're being interviewed, feel we have to be clock builders and say everything possible that relates to the answer. And in fact, being clear, concise, and on point will help you tremendously.
I really like that, and especially, people who I have meetings with or where I'm leading the meeting, they know a lot of times I don't use up the full time that allotted
Mhm.
because I don't feel like, we have to fit everything in to just go to the half hour mark or something like that. If we're done early, we're done early, and that's how it is. The interviewer will ask, "Do you have any questions for me?" And a lot of times people will go, "Nope." And, I think that is a recipe for, disaster. So what is your advice when someone says, "Hey, what are your questions for me?"
Absolutely. As we talked about in advance, the planning that we do, we research the company, we create our themes, we stockpile or create examples that support our themes. You should also be thinking about what do you want to know about this job? And the questions you ask when an interviewer says, do you have any questions for me? Demonstrate so much about yourself. This is actually part of the interview. The quality of the question you ask shows what you've learned about the company and what type of person you are. So have some questions at the ready. I think it's very hollow and empty when you say, nope, no questions. I think it's very important to have some. I personally have a favorite question that I like to ask. And Andrew, I'd like to role play this if it's okay, because it's hard for me to do both parts of this. So imagine Andrew and I are still doing that interview to see if I should be the lecturer at Stanford where I am. And the interview's over, Andrew. And would you ask me if I have any questions for you?
Of course, Matt, do you have any questions for me about working here?
Andrew, thank you for the interview. A big question I have is what question do you wish you would have asked when you were being hired in for your job? I love this question because it brings out so much insight and it shows that you're somebody who's really curious about how the company really works. And I have learned so many interesting things from this. Sometimes it's very practical. Somebody says, well, I really wish when I got hired, I would have signed up for this particular insurance coverage. But other times it's like, People will give me insights into the inner workings of the company. They'll say, well, I really wish I would have known how the difference between the product team and the engineering team has some issues. And then I follow up. I'll say, oh, so in this role, how would I be able to help with that? So asking a question that gets your interviewer to share insight into the company or their perspective can be really helpful for you. And by the way, this is a little trick in small talk. A lot of us are uncomfortable making small talk chit chat. If you get the other person talking about themselves or their experience, one, they like doing that and they like you for giving them that opportunity. And two, you can get some really good insight that you can leap off of. So the rule for chit chat and small talk is be interested, not interesting. And the rule for ending interviews with a question is get the other person talking, demonstrate your interest.
Yeah, I really, really like that. And actually, I've heard different people throughout my career suggest that, including, what is maybe the one weakness that stands out to you about myself on my resume or something. That
Mhm.
also gives you information if you don't get that job
Mhm.
to strengthen your resume or something like that in the future. So there are a lot of really good questions that you can use for figuring out if the company is for you, if the employer is for you, and also just for future job searching purposes. So I really like that question, Matt. Thanks for watching. Some great advice there. Hope you found it useful and informative. If you're looking for additional guidance on your career journey, click the buttons on the screen to see the next video in the series, or watch the full-length episode for more tips. Both videos are also listed in the description below.